Hi there. Welcome to the second installment of ADA 30 Tips for 30 Years. My name is Christina Lonnie. I am a co-lead of Seyfarth's ADA Title III team. I'm here to introduce to you the second 10 videos in our 30 for 30 series. Now remember last week, our first 10 tips talked about making facilities more accessible to individuals with disabilities. This week, our second set of 10 tips will talk about some reasonable modifications to policies, practices, and procedures that public accommodations must make under the ADA to ensure access to their goods, services, and facilities to individuals with disabilities. And then next week, we will conclude our 30 Tips for 30 Years series with our final 10 tips, which will talk about how to appropriately and effectively communicate with individuals with disabilities. We thank you so much for joining us again for the second segment of 10 tips. We hope you watched last week's and please tune in for next week's. We hope you find them informative and we please encourage you to share them with other businesses and your employees. Thanks so much for tuning in.
Welcome to the Opera House. So, when you've gone to a show or some sports event, have you noticed that sometimes there's a space next to a regular seat? That is probably a wheelchair accessible seat, and the seat next to it is called a companion seat. Together, they're called accessible seating. I'm going to go over 5 rules for how you sell tickets for accessible seating, but there are a bunch of others you should know. The first rule is that you should always sell your accessible seating online if you sell other seats online as well. Second, you need to tell people where the accessible seats are if you tell people where the non-accessible seats are. Thus, your seating chart should indicate that. Third, you need to charge the same price for your accessible seats as your non-accessible seats. Fourth, the person who is buying the wheelchair accessible seat has the right to purchase up to 3 additional contiguous tickets in the same row. Now that does not apply if there's a limit to the number of seats that people can purchase generally, and also if the seats are not available. And then finally, you have to keep the companion seat open so that it can go with the wheelchair accessible seat. But if it's the last seat available in that section and in that price point, then you can go ahead and sell it to anyone.
James Pizza, may I take your order?
Hi, I'd like to make an order for pickup. Can you bring it out to the car? I have trouble walking.
No, we don't do that.
That was an example of what not to do. The ADA requires businesses to make reasonable modifications to their normal policies, practices, and procedures to ensure access to the goods and services they provide. Therefore, if a person with a disability asks you to do things a little differently than you normally do, meaningfully consider the request and agree to it unless it fundamentally alters the nature of the goods and services you provide. Also, consider other alternatives if you can't grant the request made.
Did you know that people with mobility disabilities may use non-traditional mobility devices such as segways or golf carts to get around? These non-traditional mobility devices must be allowed in your place of business if they can be safely operated in that business. Not like that. If it's not obvious that a person is using a non-traditional mobility device because of a mobility disability, you can ask, are you using this device because of a mobility disability? If the answer is yes, and you have not seen anything to contradict this, such as running or jumping, then that person must be allowed to use the device. The person can also show you a disability parking placard or other state-issued evidence of a disability as proof.
Customers with certain mobility disabilities may not be able to stand for long periods of time. Modify your policy or practice by offering them a fold-down seat, or allow them to sit down somewhere else and notify them when it's their turn. You might also consider allowing individuals with these disabilities to move to the front of the line.
Stop. Where is that animal's vest? Do you have certification for that animal? I need to see it perform to make sure it really is a service animal.
A service animal is allowed to go anywhere that a customer or a guest is allowed to go. And remember, an employee may only ask that the service animal be removed if the animal is out of control or is not housebroken. Requiring certification, a particular type of vest, or that the animal perform the trained service is not allowed under the Americans with Disabilities Act.
Hi, welcome to our restaurant. We do not allow pets. Is this a service animal required because of a disability?
Yes, it is.
Because it's not obvious, what work or task has the animal been trained to perform for you?
She picks things up for me.
Great, welcome.
Hey there. So if this miniature horse shows up at your business, it might actually be performing a service for a person with a disability. Under the Americans with Disabilities Act, miniature horses that are individually trained to perform work or tasks for an individual with a disability, are housebroken, and are not too big for your business, must be treated like a service animal and admitted into your business. Now, if it's not clear to you that this mini horse is actually performing services for a person with a disability, then you can ask the 2 questions that my colleague covered in the prior segment.
There are quite a few rules for how reservations for accessible hotel rooms must be handled, but here are a few key tips. First, people must be able to book an accessible room on your hotel's online reservation system. Second, hotel websites and online reservation systems must provide information about the accessible rooms and the accessibility of the hotel's common areas. Third, front desk employees and hotel managers should know what accessible rooms the hotel has and what accessible features are provided in those rooms. They should know which accessible rooms have a roll-in shower, a tub with grab bars, or visual alarms. Fourth, review accessible room reservations ahead of time and pre-assign the accessible room types reserved so that they're available upon check-in. And fifth, don't assign accessible rooms to people who have not asked for them, unless it's the last room of that type that you have to sell.
If your business serves food to customers, you may receive requests to substitute ingredients. If a customer with a disability requests an ingredient substitution, your employees should fulfill that request, unless it would fundamentally alter the item being offered for sale. What can be substituted will depend on the nature of the item being served, and decisions on ingredient substitutions should be made on a case-by-case basis. Finally, if someone in a larger party requests to bring their own food into your restaurant because of a disability, you should consider this request.
have your attention, please? May I have your attention, please? A fire emergency has been reported in the building. Please leave the building by the nearest exit.
Let's take the emergency exit. It's just on the stairs.
Do you know how people with disabilities, such as a wheelchair user like myself, would be evacuated from your business in case of an emergency? When developing emergency protocols for your business, be sure to keep people with disabilities in consideration. Things like evacuation procedures, communication methods, alarm systems, signage, and areas of rescue assistance should all be considered with people with disabilities in mind.
Excuse me, sir. I work here. There's an emergency. We need to evacuate. Please follow me to the accessible area of rescue.
All the wonderful measures you're putting in place that you've taken to make sure that you are providing access to your goods and services to individuals with disabilities can be meaningless if you have not trained your employees to appropriately and empathetically interact with individuals with disabilities. Make sure you train them at the time of hire and regularly throughout their employment. It will make such a difference. And you know what? As a conversation starter, you have our 10 videos last week, you have the 10 this week, and 10 next week.